Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom, and in today's video we're going to be having a look at creating a file upload input field that supports dragging and dropping. So we're going to be achieving this using the HTML drag and drop API, and this right here is going to be the final product. Now, as we can see, I've got this drop zone area, and I can either click on this area or I can drag in files. So for example, I can just drag in here a small image file, and we can see we get a nice preview of that file alongside a small label, which of course just describes the file name. Now, if I was to drag in, for example, something different like an HTML file, so I'll just drag this in right now. For non-image files, we're going to instead just see a grey background. So of course, you can modify this code and add your own image inside there for just generic files, up to you. And like I said earlier, you can even click on this drop zone and instead choose your file in the traditional, select window. So that's the final product. Now, I do want to mention before going into this video that this solution supports multiple files, but it's not going to be showing multiple files in the actual preview. So it's only going to be selecting the first file which you choose in the preview. And the reason for that is because this video is just meant to be a guide on how to use the drag and drop API and give you a foundation for how you might go about actually creating one of those or one of these file upload fields with drag support by yourself. So if you guys do want to see a video of me, creating a multiple file upload with drag support, multiple thumbnails, things like that, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll be happy to, create one of those tutorials. But for now, this video is just going to cover the absolute basics of how to create something like this. So inside this tab right here, we've got this, empty HTML file. So inside the text editor, it looks like this. I've simply just included a CSS file alongside a JavaScript file down here. So both of those files are both empty, so we're beginning from scratch to, of course, create the file upload. So the very first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating the HTML and the CSS first before moving on to the JavaScript. So for the HTML, we're going to be creating here a main container element. So this will have a class of drop zone, and like I said, it's going to be a main container. So essentially, it's going to be representing this one right here. Okay, so inside here, there's going to be a couple of more elements. The first one is going to be just the text to tell the user, drop a file here or click to upload. So we're going to be using a span for this with a class of drop zone _ prompt. Okay, so once again, using the block element modifier CSS naming convention, but you can of course name these classes whatever you like. And inside here, I can say, for example, drop file here or click to upload. Something like that. Okay, so now let's just stop here and then go inside the CSS and just style up those two elements. So the first one is going to be the drop zone. So I can target the drop zone class, and I can say max width of 200px. And a height of 200px also. So the reason for the max width and not the regular width is because this is going to make it responsive. That way, on mobile devices, as the window resizes down to less than 200 pixels, the drop zone is going to just resize alongside it. And of course, the 200 here is to make it a nice perfect square. We're going to also say padding and set this to be something like 25px, and a display of flex, and align items of center, and a justify content of center. So these three properties are going to allow the text for the prompt to be vertically and horizontally centered. Okay, alongside this, we can say text align, make this center, and that's going to make sure that the actual text itself is aligned in the center. So of course, when it goes over two lines, it's going to be centered. Okay, now We can apply some font family or some font changes here. So for example, I'm going to set mine to be Quicksand and Sans Serif. Now these are of course completely optional, up to you if you want to be applying these properties. So a font size of 500 tends to look pretty good in my scenario, and a font size of 20px alongside that. Let's add a cursor of pointer to indicate to the user that you can actually click on the drop zone. We can add a color of just a medium or a medium to light gray, and a border of 4px and then dashed and then 009578, and that is my dcode green color. A border radius also of 10px tend to look pretty nice on these drop zones. So let's save this and refresh the page, and we get something like this. So as we can see, we're pretty much like halfway there already in terms of the CSS, but I did forget, or I did make a mistake here on the font size. So the font size actually needs to be font weight. Okay, let's save this and try again, and we get something like this. So that is all for the drop zone. However, we need to add a modifier class to make it so, once you drag over the element, it's going to change the border style, as you can see right there. So to make this change, it's quite straightforward. We can just add a class, so we can say drop dash zone and then dash dash, and then we can call this one over. So drop zone dash dash over is going to be added by the JavaScript when it needs to be added. So of course, when you drag out of the element or you cancel your drag, things like that, this class is going to be added. So for this one, we can just say border style and set the border style back to solid. So now saving this and refreshing, we can just select the container and add that class manually. So drop dash zone dash dash over, and we get something like that. Okay, cool. So now let's move on to styling up the actual thumbnail itself. But I do want to just first up, I do want to include inside here an actual input field. So I'm going to say input type of file right here. So the reason for this input type of file is it allows us to have a place where we can store the files that the user has uploaded, alongside that, that the user has selected. And alongside that, by having an input type of file, it means that we can actually wrap this entire drop zone within a form element. So something like this, for example, you can wrap the entire drop zone inside there just like that, and the input type of file is of course going to work. So you can actually submit the form like that if you don't want to go through an Ajax or a fetch method of actually uploading those files. So that's what I'm going to be using, input type of file, to of course store those files. Okay, so of course this one right here also needs to be hidden. So let's just go inside here and add a name of, let's just say, my file. Of course you'll need an attribute of a name to actually process the upload for regular form submission, and a class of, let's just go drop dash zone underscore underscore and then input. So now of course saving this and refreshing, we have something like this. Okay, so let's go inside the CSS now and of course just hide that element. So I'm going to say drop zone input, I'm going to say display and set this to be none. Let's save this and refresh, and now we get the exact same result as we did earlier. Okay, so now let's move on to applying some styles for the actual thumbnails. So back inside here, let's go inside the HTML, and we're going to be removing the prompt just for now. The JavaScript is going to be handling all of this stuff, so it's going to be removing the prompt by default once you choose a file, but just for testing purposes here, we can manually comment that line out and go down here now, and we can add a div with a class of drop dash zone underscore underscore and then thumb. So for both the image and the regular file examples, it's going to be using a div. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And here we can just say data-label equal to something like, for example, let's just say myfile.txt. So this attribute here, data label, is of course a data attribute, and it just lets us specify the label which will be displayed underneath the thumbnail. So now saving this and refreshing, we get something like this. So of course, a very expected result. Our div has no width and height, so of course it's not actually being displayed. So let's go back inside the CSS and apply some styles for the drop zone thumb class. So we can say here drop zone underscore underscore thumb, and for this one we're going to be setting the width and the height to be 100%. That way the thumbnail takes up the entire width and height of the container minus the padding. So we can also say here a border radius of 10 px. Purely cosmetic, up to you. If you do want to have the border radius, then make sure you also include an overflow of hidden. That way our border radius is always going to be displayed even if our label, which we're going to be adding very shortly, overflows the bounds of this element. Okay. Anyway, let's add a background color. Let's just do the same medium to light gray, so CCC as we did earlier, and this background color right here is going to be the color which gets displayed when you choose a regular file. Okay, we can also set a background size, and we're going to be making this a value of cover. So using background size here of cover, it's there because we're going to be setting the images for the thumbnails through the actual background. So we're going to be applying the background-image CSS property by the JavaScript to of course display the thumbnail image of your chosen image file. So by having cover, it means that the image is going to be taking up the entire space of the actual thumbnail element, and it's not going to repeat itself, and it's also going to maintain the aspect ratio. Okay, and alongside this we can give a position of relative, and this right here just allows us to position the label in the bottom of the actual thumbnail. Okay, so of course back inside the example, the label here is on the bottom, so by having this position relative we are able to change that, which we're going to be getting to very shortly. But for now, let's save this and refresh the page, and we get something like this. Okay, so obviously it's coming together for the thumbnail. So now let's just go back inside the CSS and make it so our label gets displayed. So we can say here drop zone thumb, then colon after. So we're going to be using CSS pseudo elements here just to create a new virtual element for the actual label. So we can say content and make this attr and pass through here data-label. So basically by doing this we're going to be displaying the text of the attribute data label. So of course right here myfile.txt is going to be the value for the content property. Okay, we can also say here a position of absolute, so this works in conjunction with our position relative up here in the parent element, and it lets us do, you know, bottom 0 for example and left 0. So now it's going to be in the bottom left corner, but we're going to also be adding a width here of 100%. That way of course it takes up the entire width of the thumbnail. We can also say padding, make this 5px top and bottom and 0 left and right. Let's give it a font color of white and a background of RGBA 000 and then 0.75 for a 75% opaque black. Okay, let's give it a font size of 14px and a text align of center, and now we should see our little text here, myfile.txt. We should see this in that nice black background on the bottom of the thumbnail. So now saving this and refreshing, we get this right here. And that is it for the CSS and the HTML for the file upload field. We can now move on to doing the JavaScript to of course make all of this work. Okay, so moving on to the JavaScript, I just want to firstly go back inside the HTML and just remove the drop zone prompt comment, so we can have the drop zone prompt reappear once again, and just remove the thumbnail. So the thumbnail is going to be generated through the JavaScript anyway, so we can just remove this, and this right here is our default setup when the page first loads up. So now saving this and refreshing, we have something like this. So now we can move on to the JavaScript. So inside here, we're going to be doing this by firstly just selecting each one of our input with a type of file and the class of drop zone input. Okay, so let's go inside the JavaScript, and we're going to be saying document.querySelectorAll, and then pass through here drop-zone __ input. Then we're going to be saying dot for each, and then here we're going to have holds of the input elements. And of course, right now this function is going to be running for each one of our drop zone inputs on the web page, because of course in this example here there's only one drop zone, but maybe on your website you're going to have multiple of these drop zones on a single page. So of course right here we're just selecting each one of those. So for each drop zone input, we're going to firstly just try and retrieve the drop zone container from the input field. So let's go back inside here, and we're going to be saying const drop zone element is equal to, and then input element dot closest, and then pass through here the class of drop-zone. So now using the closest method, it's going to start at the input field, and then it's going to be making its way up until it finds an element with the class of drop-zone. Of course, this one right here. So now we have the drop zone element. And in case it wasn't clear, the input element refers to this one right here. So now we have both the input element and the actual drop zone container element. We can start adding a few event listeners. Okay, so the very first event listener to add here is going to be drop zone element, and then add event listener, and then pass through here drag over. We're going to be grabbing hold of the event object right there, and inside here we're just going to be saying drop zone element dot class list dot add, and then pass through here drop dash zone dash over. So here with the drag over event, this is going to be running whenever the user drags over an image or a file, things like that. Okay, so of course once we're inside here, we're going to be adding the drop zone over class. So that's going to be adding our modifier class to, of course, change the border style from dashed to solid. So now saving this and refreshing, and then dragging over a file, we can see right there that, of course, the border changes to that solid feel. So of course we can see there's a few problems. If I was to drag out, it doesn't change back and things like that, but we're going to be fixing that very shortly. But for now, let's just go back inside the text editor, and we can move on to adding some more event listeners. So we're going to be saying here, declaring an array, we're going to be saying drag leave and then drag end. Okay, so these are two events, but we're going to be applying these events at the same time. So we can say dot for each, and then here we can say type. So of course type refers to one of these two. And then we're going to be saying drop zone element dot add event listener. We're going to be passing through the type, once again grabbing hold of the event object, and we're going to be saying here drop zone element dot class list, and this time we're going to be removing the drop zone dash over class. Okay, so the drag leave event obviously happens whenever you drag outside of the actual drop zone, and the drag end is going to be running whenever you actually cancel a drag. For example, you press on the escape key to cancel the drag. Okay, and I'll just be replacing these two with the double quotes. And of course here we're just removing that class to, of course, go back to the dashed border. Let's save this and refresh, and now if I was to drag over a thumbnail and then drag away, we can see, of course, it goes back to the dashed version. And also, if I was to press escape on my keyboard, it also goes back to the dashed version. So those two event types are working. We can now move on to the main part of this tutorial, and that, of course, is going to be handling the actual dropping of the files. So we can say here once again, drop zone element dot add event listener, and here we're going to be adding the drop event. We're going to once again be grabbing hold of the event object, and inside here, I'm not going to do anything just yet, but I do want to just console.log the event object. Okay, so let's just save this and then refresh the page, and then attempt to drag in a thumbnail. I'm going to drag this in over the drop zone and let go, and we can see right there the browser is going to open up the image in the actual web page. So that is the default behavior when you drag in a file. So in order to stop this from happening, we have to go back inside here, and we need to be adding a few prevent defaults. So inside the drag over, you need to say up here e.prevent default, just like that, and do the same thing for the drop event. So that one right there. So adding the prevent default for both of these event listeners is going to prevent that default behavior from occurring. So now saving this and refreshing, let's just go inside the console here and then drag in that same file. This time we see nothing happens, and of course in the console we get the drag event object. So in this drag event object, and this data transfer property is pretty much the most important one for this tutorial. And the reason for that is because it's got right here a files property. Okay, so this right here is a file list containing each one of our files. So as we can see here, it currently says a length of 0. Now, this is actually, I believe, after doing a bit of Googling, this is a bug in Google Chrome where it should actually be showing the updated file list. So let's go back inside the JavaScript here and say console log, this time saying e.file list directly. So now saving this and refreshing, we can see now if I drag it in, we get nothing. So let me just figure out why. Okay, so it needs to be e.data transfer, then .files. Okay, let's try again, refresh, and then drop this in. This time a length of 0, and of course we can see right there we have the file object. So like I said, the previous example with the logging to the console, that appears to be a bug, but if you log it out directly, we can see we do in fact have a list of files inside there. Okay, so with that being said, let's go back inside the text editor and remove this console log. And now we're going to be doing this. We're going to be saying if e.data transfer .files.length. So if we have at least one file that was dragged in, we're going to be saying here input element .files is equal to e.data transfer .files. So this right here is essentially taking our list of files, so our actual file list object is taking our list of files from here and then assigning it to the input element itself. So now when you submit the input element, when you submit the form with the input element inside of it, it's going to be submitting the files which you selected from the drag event. Okay, so we can then say down here update thumbnail. So we're going to be defining this function very shortly, but we're going to be calling a function called update thumbnail. We're going to be passing through the drop zone element, and then we're going to be passing through the first file. So e.datatransfer.files at index 0, and this is why our thumbnail preview only shows the first file which you selected. Okay, so now down here we can say drop zone element dot class list dot then remove, and once again remove the drop zone over class. So now let's go down here and just define that update thumbnail function real quickly. We can say function update thumbnail. and then it's going to be accepting, like I said, a drop zone element, and also our first file right there. So now I'm going to console.log. I'll just log out the drop zone element alongside the file. Okay, just for now. Let's save this and then refresh the page, and then of course choose, for example, one file. We can see right there we get the drop zone element, and also we get the file. Okay, so everything's working perfectly fine now. Also, if I was to, for example, I might just drag in multiple files here. So I'll just console.log input element.files. Okay, so the list of files on the input element itself. Okay, I'll log that out. I'll refresh, and then I'm going to be selecting multiple files here. So I'll just go inside here real quickly and select multiple files. Okay, so I've got 2 right there. Drag this in, and now we can see here we get the file list right up here. We get 2 files, 0 and 1, length of 2, and of course the function only received the first one, the vhost intro.html. Okay, cool. Let's go back inside here now. Remove this console.log. Then go down here and move on to doing this update thumbnail function. So inside here, the very first thing to do is we need to grab the hopefully existing thumbnail element. So the element which we removed earlier, we need to either grab an existing one or create a new one. So let's go back inside here and say let's thumbnail element equal to drop zone element dot query selector. We're going to be selecting the drop dash zone underscore thumb class. Okay, so obviously when you when you call this for the first time, this is going to return undefined since there is no element with that class. But on the second time, it's going to exist. So we're going to be saying here, if there is no thumbnail element, then we're going to be creating it. So I'll just say here, first time there is no thumbnail element, so let's create it. Okay, something like that. So inside here, we can then say thumbnail elements dot equals document dot create element, and pass through here, of course, div. Then we can say thumbnail element dot class list dot add. Let's add the class required. So that is drop dash zone underscore thumb. Okay. Then we can say drop zone element dot append child and pass through here our thumbnail element. Okay, so now of course we're just appending the thumbnail element to the actual container, of course this one right here. So now if I save this and refresh, we should see the actual thumbnail being created. So I'll just select a file again, and we can see we get that right there. So clearly there's one minor issue here, and that is the prompt still exists. So let's remove that prompt if it is there currently. So let's go back inside here, and we're going to be saying just below that block of code, we're going to be saying if drop zone elements dot query selector. Then we can say drop dash zone underscore prompt. So basically, if the prompt currently exists within the drop zone element, then we can just say once again query selector, and we can say dot remove to remove that element. So now saving this and refreshing, we can see now if I drag it in, the prompt gets removed on the first time, similar to this condition right here. So I might as well just say copy and just say first time, remove the prompt, and that's basically it. Okay, cool. So now let's move on, and we can just say down here thumbnail element dot data set dot label is equal to file dot name. So I do want to mention here that the file object here is an actual, proper file object, which means I can, for example here, console.log, and I'll log out the file and then save this and refresh, and we can see if I drag it in, the file looks like this. So we're just grabbing the name property from the file object, of course gauge.html, and then we are simply just setting that to the label data attribute, which I showed earlier, and of course it is being grabbed by the CSS label and of course being inserted just right there. Okay, cool. I might just copy and paste some JS doc, which I prepared earlier. So I'll just copy this and add it up here. I probably should have done this much earlier on, but there we go. So now with this JS doc, we can see we have the file type. So now if I was to say file dot and then name, it gives us the nice autocomplete for the name. So that is adding the actual label. Okay, and the very last thing to do here is of course actually display the image if it is an image. Okay, so we can say here show thumbnail for image files, and here we can say if file.type starts with, and then pass through here image /. Okay, so let's go back inside the browser real quick, and we can see here in the file object we have the type. And for the image files, I'll just drag one in real quickly here. So for image files, we can see, for example, here, the thumbnail, we get type image /JPEG. So of course, we're just checking if the type starts with image. If it does, then we're going to be, of course, displaying that image. So we can say here, const reader equal to a new file reader. So this file reader right here allows us to of course read files, and we're going to be reading the file to a data URL. Okay, so we can say here reader.read as data URL. So this gives us a base64 data URL for the file, and we're going to be passing through here the actual file just like that. And then this is actually an asynchronous call, so we need to say reader.onload, and basically we're going to be running this function right here once the reader is complete or done with reading the file. So essentially we can access it using reader.result. So we can say here thumbnail element.style.background image, background image equal to, then we can say right here using the backticks template strings. Okay, we can say URL, pass through here inside single quotes, putting a $sign and the two curly braces, we can pass through here reader.result. So like I said, reader.result is going to contain the base64 data URL representing the image, and it's going to be available once the reader is complete reading the actual file. Okay, so now saving this and refreshing, we should see now, if I was to drag in a thumbnail, it appears right there. Okay, so in the instance where, for example, the user has chosen an image like this and then they decide to change to using an actual HTML file, we can see it still stays there, the background image. So let's fix that up right now. Let's go back inside here, then say else, and here we can simply say thumbnail element.background image is equal to, let's just make this null. So of course this is going to run whenever the type is not of image. So now saving this and refreshing and then dragging in an image file, for example the same thumbnail, and then let's go back inside here and drag through a HTML file, we can see now, of course, it gets changed, and that's basically how it's going to work. Okay, so the very last thing to do here is to make it so when you click on the actual drop zone, it gives you a manual selection file input prompt. So in order to achieve this, let's go back inside the text editor. I might just go up here and just remove this console log of that file. And let's go up inside the main event listener up here, or the main for each, and then inside here, we're going to be adding an event listener once again to the drop zone element. So we're going to be saying drop zone element.add event listener and pass through here the click event. So basically, whenever the drop zone element gets clicked on, we're going to be running this function inside here, and basically, we're going to be saying input element dot click. So essentially we are programmatically clicking on the input element whenever you click on the drop zone. So now saving this and refreshing, and now clicking on the drop zone, we can see right there we get the file selection prompt. I can of course choose a file, and now we need to make it so when you of course choose a file, it's going to display the thumbnail. So let's go back inside here, and we're going to be saying right down here we can say input elements dot add event listener. We're going to be listening for the change event on the actual input field itself, and this is going to run whenever the input field value gets changed. So we can say right here, we can just say if input element dot files dot length is more than 0, then we can say update thumbnail. We're going to be passing through here the drop zone elements, and alongside that we can just say input element dot files and pass through, like we did earlier, the first file in the file list. If you want to support multiple files here, you need to simply add the multiple attribute to the input file just like that. Okay, so now I'm not going to do that. Let's just save this and then refresh the page, choose a file once again, and we can see it now displays as the thumbnail. So that is the main chunk of the work for the drag and drop file upload, but you might be wondering, how do you actually upload those files once you've got them inside the input field? So to answer that question, there's going to be two primary ways you can do this. So the very first method, and probably the easiest way to achieve this, would be to wrap the entire drop zone right here inside a post form, so something like this. So if you're using, for example, PHP as your server-side technology, we can say, for example, upload-file.php. Obviously, this is going to change depending on your own situation. Just an example, and then here you can just say enc type and make sure this is set to multipart/form data. And then inside here, inside this form, you can simply just copy and paste the drop zone, and it should all work as it would normally. So if you're not too sure how to upload the file using a form, just do a quick Google online and figure out how to actually do it. But essentially the input type of file needs to be inside the form. And then of course here you can say input type of submit to actually of course submit that form and do whatever you need to do. The second way to upload the files or the file would be to upload it asynchronously using either Ajax or the Fetch API. So I've got a video on uploading files with the Fetch API if you're interested, and hopefully that video should cover most, if not all, of the content to actually upload that file asynchronously. And that is how to create a file upload field with our drag and drop capabilities. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you later.